In this lesson, we'll take a look at how to draw lips and a mouth with colored pencils. We'll start with a simple contour line drawing on Stonehenge paper. Stonehenge paper is 100% cotton and does a fabulous job of accepting multiple applications of colored pencils. I'll be using Prismacolor Premier pencils, which are wax-based colored pencils for this demonstration. We'll start here with a 20% cool gray application, which might be surprising since, of course, teeth we assume are white, but teeth actually have a multitude of different colors in them. So we're starting with this cool gray, and then we're going to go back and start addressing some of the highlights. We're going to address the highlights earlier on so that we can basically preserve them. We want these highlights to be very strong and stand out. So we're going to go over the top of these highlights with a white. We're also going to go over the top of those cool gray applications with a light application with the white as well. What we're going to do here is we're going to slowly build up multiple layers of applications of the colored pencils, and in the process we're going to build a lot of depth in the color and of course make the color a bit stronger and more bold as we go. Of course, this requires quite a bit of patience. Colored pencils is one of those mediums that gives us a lot of control over what we create, but it also requires quite a bit of patience because it is a slower process. Now over the top, we're going to introduce our third color, which is French gray, and this gray is a little bit warmer than the cool gray. This 20% French gray gives us a little bit more variety in the color. And of course, we're not using it over the entire surface of each one of the teeth. Instead, we're selecting areas. Now we switched over to our fourth color, and this fourth color is cream. And of course, the cream is going to give us a little bit of a warmer feel to the teeth and make the teeth, of course, appear more natural. Now, even though we have some warmer sections, we also have some cooler highlights, believe it or not. So we're going to use cloud blue for this. This will just give us a hint of some cooler areas within the teeth, and it'll contrast the cream nicely. Now, of course, we need to start pushing some of the darker values. They're not just light values in and around the teeth, so we'll use 70% French gray for this. Again, this is a warmer gray, and it's much darker as you can see here. We're also going to start blending some of the applications. Now, I'm using a colorless blender for this. Basically, a colorless blender is a shaft of the binder without any pigment in it at all. So basically what we can do is we can use the binder, the waxy binder, and move the material around the surface and, of course, burnish these applications. So when we burnish these applications, some natural mixing occurs. This will help get rid of some of the texture that's created by the tooth of the paper when we make applications with the colored pencils. So as we work our way across with the 70% French gray, we'll blend these applications using the colorless blender. And we're also blending some of the applications that we've already made with some of the lighter values as well. You can see here when we're adding this 70% French gray, since it's so much darker, it's making the lighter values pop a little bit more. It's increasing the contrast. Of course, one of our goals is to create a full range of value. Value, of course, is the darkness or lightness of color. We want to make sure that we have the darkest darks and the lightest lights and the middle values in between. So gradually throughout the process, we increase the contrast. The lighter values appear lighter and the darker values, of course, appear a bit darker. You'll notice throughout this demonstration that I'm avoiding using black at all. Instead, I'm going to use a series of layered colors to mix to create a more natural black. Of course, our first color here is the 70% French gray, and you'll see here that it does a surprisingly good job creating those dark shadows in between each one of the teeth. Now we'll start adding a bit of color to the gums, and we'll start with a dark red. In this case, I'm going to use a bit of Tuscan red. I'm going to leave a little bit of space around the outer edges for some of the lighter reds that we'll use here. We'll also use this Tuscan red in the darker areas on either side of the corners of the mouth. Now for the lighter areas within the gums, we'll use a bit of peach here. Before we burnish and mix these applications, we'll darken up some of the values a bit further and increase the contrast, this time with a bit of dark brown. Now we use the dark brown to create the darker values and of course keep the color temperature warm. We'll also use it on either side of the mouth as well. Then we can simply burnish and mix these applications using the colorless blender. Now, of course, the teeth curve around within the head and go back into the mouth, and that's going to create some darker areas on some of the teeth on either edge. So we'll go back with the 70% French gray and darken up the teeth on either end, allowing the teeth on the front to be quite a bit lighter. Now we're ready to turn our attention to the lips, and this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our attention. We're going to layer lots of different colors here, starting with our first color, which is carmine red. You'll notice that we're applying this color using alternating strokes. In other words, some of our lines are going vertically and some of our lines are going horizontally. You can think of these strokes as being somewhat like cross contour lines which flow over the form of the lips. Of course, these strokes will not only create the impression of the form of the lips, but it will also add to the illusion of texture. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of accentuate this texture a little bit and exaggerate it a bit as we go. We're patiently applying the carmine red here, and we're not putting a heavy amount of pressure. In fact, we're leaving some spaces of the paper showing through so that we can go back with the white now and preserve some areas of highlight. Of course, these highlighted areas are not going to seem very strong right now because we're going to have to build up some of the darker values to increase the contrast and make the highlights appear a bit stronger. But even in the end, the highlights will not quite be strong enough, so we'll be pulling one of our Illustrator tricks to make the lights quite a bit stronger. Now I'm going back with the peach, and I'm just creating a bit more of a fleshier type color here. The lips, of course, are a part of the flesh, so we can't stick completely with just reds. And as we're adding this peach, you'll notice that some of the color starts to burnish, and we start to get a smoother appearance. Now we're ready to start applying our next red, and this red is a little bit darker. This red is crimson red, and we're going to start working some of the areas in between the highlighted sections. We're also going to leave some of the areas that we addressed with the peach and the more fleshy areas of the lips, but as you can see, as we start to add this slightly darker red, the highlights become a little bit stronger and we're getting a little bit more contrast. Now we'll soften some of the texture a bit with an application of the colorless blender. You can see how it's working the colors that we've already got on the surface together and mixing them on the surface, and of course creating a smoother appearance as well. Now the lips have a little bit of a purplish tone to them as well, so we're going to add a bit of the color mulberry here. We just want to add a hint of this color, so we're not going to cover the lips entirely, just a couple of areas. Now we're ready to start pushing the values a little bit darker, and this time we'll add a bit of Tuscan red. You can see how much darker this red is here. And of course, as we put it next to some of the lighter values, it increases the contrast and of course makes those subtle wrinkles in the lips a little bit more clear. Again, we'll somewhat consider our directional strokes here. We're going to make the strokes either vertically or horizontally going across the surface of the lips. The more that we echo this, the more that will create that impression of texture. Now we'll also address some of the lighter values as well. Now we'll add a bit of light peach to the upper portion of the lip, and this is just going to lighten the values just slightly and of course make some of those midtones and darker values a little bit more evident. To add a bit of warmth to the lips, we're going to add our next color, which is terracotta, and of course this color is more of a reddish brown. Again, we're going to use this in selected areas just again to increase the contrast and warm up the color a bit. You can see that this is a slow process and we're just patiently adding colors. I get a lot of folks that ask me, how do I know which colors to use and when to use them? And the answer is, you don't necessarily always know. In other words, I don't sit down with a plan ahead of time. Instead, I'm just picking colors as I go along, trying to put the puzzle together as I go. We'll bring back a little bit more of that purplish undertone there, this time with a dark purple. And now we'll need to push the values a little bit darker, and this time it's with a bit of dark brown. And at this point, there's a nice layer of wax on the surface from our multiple applications, and the colors just glide right on. Now we'll need to address a little bit of the corners of the mouth and some of the edges around the lips, so a little bit of light peach is applied here before going back with a bit of Tuscan red. Alright, now we'll turn our attention to the lower lip. And we'll address it in a similar manner. Here I'm going over the top with an application of peach. And again, you can see that this is smoothing out quite a bit of the color and preparing the surface for our darker color. Here again, we're going to add a little bit of crimson red. Now for the bottom lips, definitely more of the lines are going a bit more vertically. So we're going to allow those lines to go vertically over the lips. Now on either edge, they get a little bit more diagonal, and that's just because these lines are flowing over the lips themselves. Then of course we'll add a little bit of purple just like we did on the top, this time with a bit of mulberry. We'll use this color mostly on the bottom portions of the bottom lip and in the corners. Now we'll start the process of darkening up some of the values, and of course we'll use our darker red for this, and this is Tuscan Red. And again, we'll work in between the highlighted areas so that we can increase the contrast in these locations as well. If we make an area darker that's next to a lighter value, it makes the lighter value a lot lighter, and it makes the darker value a lot darker if we make a lighter area lighter. So we want to increase the contrast whenever we can. And since the bottom lips stick out and bend over, some of the darker values will exist actually on the bottom portion of the lip. So not just in the corners, but also on the bottom portion we'll work this Tuscan Red. And then of course we can darken the value even further with a bit of dark brown, as you can see we're doing here in the corners. Now of course we'll use our light peach down here as well, and this will create a smoother transition between some of the lighter values and some of the darker values. It'll also burnish some of the colors, creating a smoother appearance. Now in the darkest locations on either corner of the mouth, we'll add a bit of indigo blue, which will layer over the top of the dark brown and create a more natural black. Now each one of the corners of the mouth, there's a little bit of a darker value. Since we've applied some light peach here, we can go over the top with a couple of different browns to start building up the impression of a darker shadow. And the first color we'll use there is a bit of raw umber, and then over the top a light touch of our dark brown. You can see these colors naturally mix with the light peach, but then we can go over the top of it with a colorless blender and work them in, making the appearance even smoother. Now, of course, the edges of the lips are very important. A lot of times we assume that the lips just end and there should be a line there, but there's actually not a line. Usually the edges of the lips transition very subtly into the flesh areas around them. So for this demonstration, we'll just use a little bit of light peach around the edges. Now we're ready to make our highlights really strong and make them really pop from the paper. Now we're going to use an illustrator's trick here to do so. Instead of going back with a colored pencil and trying to bear down really hard and bring out those whites, instead we're going to use a bit of gouache. Now gouache is opaque watercolor, and here I'm using a script liner brush to apply it. And we're only going to apply it in the areas where the highlights are really strong. So I'm using just a small amount of water here with this gouache, and of course you can see it goes on opaquely and it covers right over the top of the colored pencil applications, and it's really useful for creating these really strong highlights, especially when you're trying to create a surface or create the illusion of a surface that's wet. And of course we've got some wetness on the teeth, and of course the lips should appear to be quite a bit moist, so the gouache is a perfect solution for this. Here again, we're going to consider what we considered at the beginning stages when we started applying that carmine red to the lips. For the most part, our strokes are going to be either vertically or horizontally applied to the surface. Of course, they should be following the texture of the lips. And by far, this is the most gratifying and satisfying part of the process. Of course, adding these strong highlights is really a lot of fun. It's easy to overdo it, so make sure that you don't overdo it. Just pay attention to the highlights that you see in your own reference. And after our final applications are made with the gouache, our colored pencil drawing of lips and a mouth is complete. If you're ready to learn more about drawing and painting, then check out our comprehensive membership program, which includes video courses, weekly live lessons, ebooks, lesson plans for teachers, and much more. To learn more about our program, just click on the card in the upper right-hand corner or visit thevirtualinstructor.com/members today. And if you'd like to check out 3 of our course modules for free, you can do so by joining our mailing list. Just click on the link you see here on your screen. You'll get access to 3 of our course modules, which includes videos and ebooks, and of course you'll get updates when new lessons are posted on the website. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching.